Well, welcome everybody today. We are really excited once again to be hosting a webinar from here at Strata Leadership for our community. We had just about 500 people register for today. This is a webinar, so you're not going to have your video feature up and running, but you are able to chat and ask some questions in the Q&A box, which we'll cover in a second. But like I said, at Strata Leadership, we've launched several free webinars over this crazy and wild season, and we hope that they've been beneficial for you and your teams. Again, if you've missed the first three from us, you can get on our YouTube channel. Just get on YouTube, search Strata Leadership. We've done one on strategic planning and critical thinking and strategic planning in uncertain times. I'm really excited for this three-part series we're launching today. Today, Wes Martin, which you'll meet in a second, is going to lead us in this first series on self-awareness for leaders. We sat back and looked at, now that as leaders, we've figured out, okay, how do we strategize? How do we make decisions and think critically through this time? What's next? And Dr. Nathan Meller on the last webinar talked about community. And as a leader, one of the key facets of creating community is self-awareness, and creating an environment of safety is self-awareness for a leader as they lead a team. So I hope this three-part series on self-awareness benefits you, benefits your team. Again, and after this one, if you get done with this and you wish your team would have seen this, this will be up on YouTube. So please feel free to share this free resource. We are grateful just for the outpouring of engagement from our clients and our friends on this webinar. We really enjoy this, and we hope this is beneficial to you during this time. Again, we're committed to you and committed to our clients and community through this until we get back to the new normal, right? So a couple of housekeeping things so we can maximize the learning experience. The first thing is at the bottom on most of your screens. If you're on a phone or maybe a tablet, it might look a little bit different, but on a computer, the Q&A box is going to be on the very bottom of the screen. Click on that. You can ask me questions and I will moderate. I'm Jeremiah Shaw. I am the Executive Vice President of Strata Leadership, and I'm going to be hosting today. So when you see somebody texting and chatting with you in the chat box, that's myself. So please feel free to ask me questions. We can keep that anonymous if you'd like, or you can do it under your name, and I'm happy to give you a shout out as well as we engage with Wes here in a minute. The second thing is the chat box. We're going to dive in there with a couple questions here in a second. So the chat box is at the bottom. Click on that, and there's a blue tab, and you're going to make sure that is selected to the panelists and participants, because we want everybody to engage. One thing at Strata is we love being kind of this networker and this hub for community. We love creating community. We believe that you don't get through the good times or the bad times without community. So we hope that this is a platform for you all to connect with other professionals and just learn how other people are doing this and getting through this. And so please feel free to engage in the chat room with each other, not just us. So I got one question. We're going to do a poll real quick because we love to hear back from you. So please answer this poll as honestly as you can. And Wes is going to bring this up later in this. So go ahead and answer this. And this is going to be really fun for us. The second thing we'd love for you to do is open the chat box and just let us know your name, what organization you're with, where you're from. I know on our last webinar, we had people from all over the world, from Indonesia to Malaysia to China to Costa Rica, and then all over the US, obviously. So really excited for you all to get to know each other in that chat box. Again, if you want to engage somebody specifically in there, you can highlight their name. For an example, you can put Bob Marley. He's not on here, obviously, but Bob Marley, click on that and message them directly to get their contact info if you want to do that. So the third question we'd love to know from you and hear from you is, what do you hope to learn today? So go ahead and put that in the chat box, and that way Wes and I can see that, and we're going to make sure to the best of our ability that we meet that expectation and provide relevance throughout this webinar. So if you have not seen or know or met Wes Martin in person or virtually, I'm really excited for you to get to know him. He is not only a friend of mine, he's a father and a husband to his wife, and he is great at that, by the way. But on top of that, he's also phenomenal, just peer and an expert in this world of leadership. This webinar series has been based on not only our experience personally as a team, but we've come together, and Wes has done the majority of this research, but he's done some phenomenal research on this topic. And I think you're going to walk away with some really practical application that you can immediately start executing for yourself and for your team, and hopefully build that environment of trust as we all enter back into the workforce together, as we drive a place of safety, accountability, and hopefully learn how to gather feedback and give feedback. So Wes Martin, we're about to jump in, and I'm about to pass it off to you. But one thing to know about Wes is he is a phenomenal person that has some of the best insights that I've ever been around. I love talking to Wes because every time he sees things just from a different angle than I do, which is what makes our team so powerful. Everybody on the team just has a different viewpoint, different strengths, and it's just fun to work together on projects like this. Wes has his master's from Colorado State University in IO psychology, and so he does have a strong background in this. So I hope you enjoy this time with Wes. Again, please engage with each other in the chat box. As you think of questions throughout this, send them in the Q&A section at the bottom of the screen, and I'm going to get to those along with Wes at the very end of this. We're going to spend about 10 or 15 minutes engaging those questions and just having a great conversation. So sit back, relax, forget about what's going on in the world, and I hope you just take a breath and engage and learn. Wes, you can take it from here, and I'm going to go ahead and step back here.
All right. Thanks, Jeremiah. Well, as Jeremiah said, my name is Wes Martin, and I serve as the Manager of Leadership Development Services for Strata Leadership. And for me, my job it's a true calling. So I found early in my career, I was promoted to a leadership position and thought, this is my shot. This is my shot to prove myself. I've always seen myself as a leader. I'm going to come in from day one. I'm going to change everything. I'm going to revolutionize this place. The team's going to be the highest functioning. The organization's going to see me as this incredible leader. And in my youthful arrogance and excitement and ambition, I went in and I burned out in 6 months. And none of the things that I thought were going to happen, you know, if you're this natural born leader and you love people and you want to drive a mission and drive a vision and you care for your team and support them, that things will all just work out fine and it'll be great. And I wish desperately that I would have had a mentor or a coach, an ally and an advocate in my corner telling me, slow down, don't put so much pressure on yourself. This is what leadership actually looks like, and here's how I want to support you as a leader. And so for me, from that painful experience and from that burnout and really low point in my life, I decided ultimately, as Jeremiah said, to go get my master's in industrial and organizational psychology, with the mission and the calling to help leaders like you, to meet you where you are, to serve you, to encourage you, to be a resource for you, to be a champion for you. Because leadership is a burden and leadership is hard. Leadership is often perceived as this glamorous thing that we should aspire to. And then we get there and we realize that it's a lot more work and it can be a lot more draining and even painful at times than we realize. And so our hope with this webinar today and with this whole series is just so we can be a resource for you as a leader, for you as an employee. Leadership is influence. It's not title. You're a leader regardless of where you are in your career journey. But that's just our hope today and throughout this series is that we would be able to create this space for you to feel served, to feel poured into, to feel rejuvenated. And I'm just so excited to spend this hour with you. We don't take it lightly that you would choose to spend an hour with us. And so we want to add as much value as we possibly can over the next hour. As we're talking, if you're thinking through and you have questions, we will have time for question and answer at the end. So type those into the Q&A, and Jeremiah will either answer those in the moment, or we'll do a Q&A at the end. Or if you know anything about Strata, you'll know that if we're not able to answer your question during the session, we'll follow up with you later. So if you have a question, send it in there and we absolutely will get to that. So before we get started into this topic of self-awareness, let me end this poll and share the results with you. So I want to share these results. You should be able to see these on your screen. So we asked you, how would you rate your driving skills? And of the 200, almost 300 people we have in this webinar today, the vast majority of you said that you were average or above average. Now, if you're a statistician or you just know basic principles of average versus above average and below average, you see the punchline coming. We can't possibly have 39% of you be above average, 54% of you be average, and only 7% of you be below average. But actually, I would say that this group here, this room, is actually more self-aware than what a lot of researchers have found. So this question, this experiment has been replicated time and again. And consistently, people, about 80% of people say that they are above average drivers. Now, just based on the principles of average, only 50% can be above average, only 50% can be below average. If we're going off of a normal bell curve, about 64% would fall into that average category, and then the rest would be distributed on the two ends. So we can see just through this simple question, we may not be as self-aware, we may be a little bit faulty in our thinking from time to time. And I don't want to harp on anybody. I totally would say that I'm above average as well. But it shows us that our self-awareness in comparison to others is not always that accurate. So there's a quote, and I'm probably going to butcher the name. It's from an old Greek playwright years and years ago of Know Thyself. And I'm not even going to try to attempt the name. But this idea of know thyself, what a good sounding thing. That's one of the things that you see on Instagram or you see on Facebook in the morning or your LinkedIn page that's so encouraging and uplifting. But what does it really mean? What does it mean to know thyself? How does one know thyself? Why should one know thyself? Are there benefits and drawbacks to knowing yourself in different ways? And we're going to cover all of that today. Today, I have kind of 4 goals for us as we go through this webinar. And I'd ask you, do you want the good news or bad news first? Now, I've already put the PowerPoint together, so you're getting the bad news first. Today, we're going to cover a lot of the bad news, and I don't want that to be discouraging to you. If you stick around till the end, we're going to end on a high note with some good news for you. And then parts 2 and 3 in this series, which will be in 2 weeks, where Jeremiah Shaw, who you just met, will be leading you through how do you as a leader create a culture of feedback? So how do you create a culture and a work environment that's safe enough that people giving and receiving feedback to enhance self-awareness is a normal part of your everyday culture of your organization. And then the third part, Dr. Nathan Meller, our president and CEO here at Strata Leadership and one of the top leadership experts truly in the world, will be talking to you about how coaching can help elevate your self-awareness and take your leadership to the next level. So we'll be covering that in parts 2 and 3. But today we need to start out with some bad news. So here's the first bit of bad news. Research would tell us that 85 to 90% of you are not self-aware. And of course I said you and not us because I'm excluding myself, because the same research would tell us that 80% to 90% of you think that you are highly self-aware. And so you're probably, of the 300 participants in this room, there's probably about 250 of you, just going off of research, that are saying, I'm the exception to the norm. I'm the 10 or 15%. Just like the driving question, I'm above average. This rule, this law doesn't apply to me. So a lot of you in this moment are thinking, this is not me. I'm in the 10 to 15% that are highly self-aware. And I just want to tell you, the data doesn't lie. It tells us that 85 to 90% of you are not self-aware. So here's the really bad news, as if it could get worse. The more power and experience you have, the less likely you are to be self-aware. And we're going to unpack all of this throughout our training today. So I don't want you to get too caught up on this because we'll talk about it later. But the bad news is, for those of you who are in leadership positions and positions of influence within your organization, you're actually more likely to be less self-aware than aware. And here's the really bad news, and I can rant on the male gender right now. These numbers are even worse for men. So women tend to fall into about 19% of women are considered self-aware, and only about 4% of men are considered self-aware. So if you're a male and an executive or a leader, you're in a really, really tough spot, but we're going to talk about how you can improve your self-awareness later. Here's the even worse news. I'm sorry, I know I'm going down this rabbit hole. I'm bringing everybody down on this Thursday. But the even worse news is knowing that most of us are not self-aware, myself included, knowing that the more power and experience you have, the less likely you are to be self-aware. We also know that self-awareness is a critical component to leadership effectiveness. And we're going to share some data and some metrics later from some research studies talking about the connection between self-awareness and leadership effectiveness. But it's not looking good so far for us, right? Then I'm going to end with some good news. So the good news is you can improve your self-awareness. And we're going to give you some resources today, as well as share some opportunities for you that I think will be really beneficial and you're really going to want to hear about. And then also, again, in parts 2 and 3 of this series, we'll talk about how you can improve your self-awareness. So let's start with the first part, the bad news. 85 to 90% of you are not self-aware. And again, I'm using that you jokingly because myself, I'm included absolutely in this category. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. I tend to be the kind of person, I'm introverted, but I thrive on community. I like being in situations where I can bond with others and connect with others on a deep level. I don't really like staying on the surface. I like going to that intimate place where I really want to know you from the get-go. And so I'm going to be transparent with you, and I would love for you to be transparent with me. So when I get around people that are a little bit more reserved or maybe shy or sensitive, that can be really difficult for me. And in those social situations, I can be a bit of a bull in a china shop. And I've only learned this in recent years. So I'll tell you a story. A few years ago, my wife and I were with some friends that we go to church with, and we went to the Garage, a local burger restaurant here in Oklahoma City, after church, and we were there with all of our friends. And there's one guy who's in our group of friends, in our small group through church. So we know each other really well, and his name is Peter. And I'm sitting next to Peter at dinner, and Peter is highly introverted. He has a very sensitive, very gentle, very shy personality, temperament. And so he tends to be kind of reserved. And I'm really wanting to draw him into the conversation. Well, if you grew up in a family like mine, the way that you foster connection with others is by picking on them, right? This is maybe not normal behavior, but a lot of us grew up in families where if you really want to form that connection, sarcasm is high, you joke with each other, you give each other little jabs, and that's actually a sign of affection. So the more that I pick on you or the more that I kind of poke at you, the more I'm trying to connect with you and the more I'm showing you that I like you. Now, about half of you right now are going, I totally get that. I was raised that way. The other half of you are going, you're a terrible person. I never want to be around you in social settings. How could you ever think that to be my friend, the path to that would be picking on me or joking with me? Well, that's just how I grew up. And that's a big component of self-awareness. And one of the reasons these numbers are so high is you are the only person who has ever grown up in the time period that you did, with the family that you did, in the chronological order of your siblings that you did. You have so many unique life experiences that make you you and inform how you see the world and how you relate to others, that it's almost impossible for you to be self-aware. Because just as fingerprints are unique to all of us, our personalities, our temperaments, our worldviews are very unique to us as well. And these all combine to make us different. And so the nuances of being self-aware of how do others perceive me and how do I perceive myself, those nuances are so many and so nuanced that it's really difficult to see yourself accurately and relate yourself to the world accurately. So we're going through this dinner and I think we're having a great time. I think Peter's thinking, man, Wes is the coolest guy. He's drawing me out of my bubble. He's getting to know me. He's showing me he likes me. He's being my friend in this moment. And after dinner, my wife, who tends to be really similar to Peter, she's very shy, very sensitive person. She goes, why do you do that? Why would you embarrass him like that? Why would you pick on him like that? Didn't you see you were making him really uncomfortable? And the truth is I didn't. I had no idea. And if my wife had not told me that, I probably would keep stumbling through life thinking this is a normal way of relating to others. I'm earning his attention. I'm earning his affection. We're deepening our friendship. When in reality, I was isolating him. And when my wife told me that, I was able to look back on the history of my life and see how through elementary school I did this. I had a really close friend in elementary school that I thought we were buddies. And one time we were just horse playing around, and then after that, he didn't want to be my friend anymore. And I never understood why. And so for my wife to bring this attention to me, to hold a mirror up to me and say, this is how others see you, despite how you see yourself and despite your intentions, was really helpful for me and has been incredibly beneficial to me being able to move forward and have healthy relationships and act in a functional manner where others and I are able to coexist and get along together. So I'm right there in the same boat with you. So before we dive in too much, we should probably get started with a definition of self-awareness. There are many definitions of self-awareness, but for this series and for this webinar today, the operational definition we're going to be working with is that self-awareness is the extent to which someone is consciously aware of their internal state, as well as their relationships or interactions with others. So self-awareness is the extent to which someone is consciously aware of their internal state, as well as their relationship or interactions with others. And that's Sutton 2016. So we can see within this, there's this dichotomy of there's self-awareness of self, and then there's self-awareness in relationship with others. And we're definitely going to unpack that more today. So self-awareness, that's our operational definition. One of the ways that developmental psychologists study self-awareness and determine who is self-aware and who's not self-aware. So amongst the animal kingdom, human beings included within that, there's a test that developmental psychologists and social psychologists do called the mirror self-recognition test. And this is only testing one component of self-awareness, but the experiment goes something like this. The researchers will give an anesthetic to the animal or to the person, and then they'll put a mark on the body, and they don't do this with people because we know that people are self-aware, so we're beyond that. They did it with children, but they'll do it with animals, put a mark on their body somewhere, and then have a mirror up. And if the animal sees that mark in the mirror, if they reach for it in the mirror and they try to get it off of the mirror, then that's a fairly good indicator that they are not aware that they are a being reflected in this mirror. They don't have a sense of self, a sense of identity, a self-concept. But for the animals that do, they see the mark in the mirror and they reach for it and they try to get it off. That tells researchers that they're seeing the reflection in the mirror and they're recognizing that's a reflection of me. And so this idea, this language, or the ability to think of me or I as a separate being existing in relationship, in community, is one of the hallmarks of self-awareness. And through this test, researchers have been able to identify that children between 6 months to 18 months develop this sense of self-awareness. And Jeremiah mentioned that I'm a husband and I'm a father, and I absolutely am. It's a huge part of my identity. It's my joy of life is to be a husband and a father. And my daughter right now is 15 months old. And about a month ago, my wife was doing the little Instagram thing with the filters where you can have the different animal faces on you. And it was really cool to see this mirror self-recognition test at play as my daughter. So if you want to try this at home, my daughter was seeing into the reflection in the phone that she had this dog cartoon with the little ears and the nose on her face. And rather than reach for the phone and try to wipe it off the phone, she was trying to get it off of her face. And she was swatting. So she recognized that she was a being existing separate from her reflection and that she was trying to get this off. And again, this is only one component of self-awareness, but it's one of the ways that researchers test this. And there are very, very few species within the animal kingdom. Several primates, one fish, and then one elephant, and only one type of elephant. So only Asiatic elephants have passed this mirror self-recognition test. So this idea of self-awareness, it's not distinctly human, but it is very human. Is one of the things, this idea of self-consciousness, of being aware of self, is something that differentiates human beings from the vast majority of other animals. One other thing that we should say before we get going is that self-awareness is not a destination point, but rather an emerging process where one continually comes to understand his or her unique talents, strengths, sense of purpose, core values, beliefs, and desires. So self-awareness is not something that we attain and all of a sudden I'm highly self-aware and I know how to see myself. But because we're constantly changing, because as life goes on, our worldviews and our experiences change. It's this constant process of evaluating what are my values, not just my values as a human being, although those tend to stay fairly consistent throughout adulthood, but what are my values on a weekly, on a monthly, on a yearly basis? And are my beliefs, are my strengths, are those things changing? Are they evolving? When I change situations, my fit with my environment, if I join a new team or join a new organization, join a new group, does that change? Does that change the dichotomy? If I enter into a relationship with somebody new, that changes the self-awareness. And so self-awareness is this ongoing, constant thing that we have to be aware of and we have to constantly be monitoring. Do I see myself rightly, and do others see myself the way that I see myself? So is there consistency? Is there congruence between how I see myself and how others see me? That's one of the true hallmarks of self-awareness. So within self-awareness is not just this one sweeping thing. There are actually two components of self-awareness. And a lot of this comes from the research by Dr. Tasha Eurich. And Dr. Tasha Eurich and her team have done research over the years of self-awareness. And she wrote a book called Insight, which we'll reference a little bit later. And so this comes from that book. But what Dr. Eurich and her team were able to see is that there are two types of self-awareness. There's internal self-awareness, being defined as how clearly you see your passions, values, aspirations fit with environment, reactions, and impact on others. And then there's an entirely separate component of self-awareness, and I'll tell you why I call it entirely separate, called external self-awareness. External self-awareness being understanding how others see you in terms of your values, passions, aspirations, fit with environment, reactions, and impact on others. So the categories remain the same between internal and self-awareness and external self-awareness. It's all about your values, your passions, your aspirations, your fit with environment, your reactions, and your impact on others. And what Dr. Eurich and her team have seen is that these two are not correlated. So you would expect that the more internally self-aware you are, the more externally self-aware you are, and vice versa. And what the research bears out is this isn't true. There isn't necessarily a connection. So these really are two distinct ideas that we have to be conscious of and we have to be aware of in different environments and different settings. And both are crucial to our success as human beings and as leaders. So internal self-awareness is positively related to or has a strong statistically significant correlation with things like your own job and life satisfaction, personal and social control, and happiness. That makes sense, right? And it's negatively correlated with things like anxiety, stress, and depression. So the more clearly you see yourself, the more deeply you understand yourself, the more congruence there is between who you actually are and who you believe yourself to be. There's not this idea of cognitive dissonance. So cognitive dissonance being there's a difference between how I see myself and how I actually am. And that creates things like anxiety, depression, and stress. So we understand this intuitively, that internal self-awareness would raise these things like our own life satisfaction, that it would decrease our anxiety, that it would give us personal and social control. We're not driving blindly here. We know the machine, we understand the inner workings of ourselves, and we know how to get the best out of ourselves in those situations, enhancing our control through increased internal self-awareness. We understand that intuitively, but to me, and maybe not for you, to me, the more surprising thing is that external self-awareness has the exact same effect, but in the opposite direction. So not only one of the hallmarks I would say of maturity is understanding that your actions have consequences, not just for yourself, but for others, right? How you behave, how you, with the things that you do, the decisions you make aren't just about you. You're a social being existing in a lot of micro environments with different people in different groups, and your actions, your decisions have an effect on them. And so one of the hallmarks of external self-awareness is being able to see that it's positively related to a better relationship with employees, employee satisfaction, and perceived leadership effectiveness. So external self-awareness, how aware you are of how others see you and how you're able to moderate your behavior and moderate your emotions in relation to how others see you, actually makes others' lives better. So not only is self-awareness important for you to make your own life better, but your self-awareness has a direct effect on the happiness, the satisfaction, the stress, the depression, and anxiety of others. And I just think that's incredible. And so it's negatively related to external self-awareness is negatively related to these same things: anxiety, stress, and depression. Maybe you've had a boss before, or maybe some of you are fans of the American sitcom The Office, with a boss like Michael Scott, who's painfully not self-aware, painfully unaware of his own self and his values and beliefs and desires. He's constantly saying things that aren't true. Maybe you work for somebody like that, or maybe you have in the past, and you see that their actions, their behaviors have a direct effect on you. So because they're unaware of their own self, you have higher stress, you have higher depression, you have higher anxiety. In that leadership position that I mentioned earlier, where I had been promoted to the position of leader and had all this ambition, one of the key components of my job was I was constantly hiring. So I had 8 direct reports, and it was a heavy turnover environment for a lot of different reasons, but we had kind of this revolving door of employees. So I was constantly hiring. And I would do these hiring sessions. I would do the interview sessions with my vice president at the time, who I really respected as a leader and looked up to. And in these interviews, I was taking it so serious. I wanted, seeing myself as this leader, I wanted to make the right hire. I wanted to get the best person for myself, for my team, just like all of you do in interview settings. And so because of that, I would go into these interviews and I would be really serious. And I would put on my most serious face, and I would stare at people, and I would ask them really deep, what I perceived to be really deep, really serious questions that were kind of intense and in your face. And I would just have this persona, this kind of tense, uptight persona throughout. And this was not something that I was aware of, but it was something that my vice president at the time pointed out to me. And he said, "Hey, you might try smiling a little bit in interviews. Like when they come in and when you shake hands, you might do a warm greeting and smile at them." He said, "I really think you're intimidating people, and you can see them squirming throughout the interview and getting more uncomfortable with the more questions that you answer." And that was never my desire to make the candidates uncomfortable. If anything, I wanted that to be a warm, welcome environment. But I was unaware of how my facial expressions, my body language, my posture, and my lack of smiling and lack of warmth was affecting them. And so it took this vice president pointing this out to me for me to increase my internal self-awareness and see that I need to relax a little bit. And I'm trying to be the type of person that's not intimidating, and yet my actions are bearing out that I'm making people uncomfortable, I'm making people anxious, and I'm very intimidating in those interview settings. And so ever since he pointed that out to me, I've tried in interview settings to smile as much as possible and to be as warm and friendly as I can be. And it was just something I was completely unaware of. So Dr. Urich and her team, they have categorized external self-awareness and internal self-awareness in this matrix. And you can see there's 4 quadrants in here. And I'm just going to go through this really quickly. You can find all of this online. It's the 4 self-awareness archetypes. So if you want to research that, take a note, go research it later. We're just going to cover it really quickly. So the idea of having because internal awareness and external awareness are not strongly correlated to one another, it's possible to be high in one and low in the other, and vice versa. And those who are high in external self-awareness and high in internal self-awareness are considered aware. They know who they are, they what they want to accomplish, they seek out and value others' opinions. This is where leaders begin to fully realize the true benefits of self-awareness. In the bottom right corner, we see pleasers, and pleasers are high in external self-awareness, but low in internal self-awareness. And so they can be so focused on appearing a certain way to others that they could be overlooking what matters to them. And over time, they tend to make choices that aren't in service of their own success and fulfillment. Now, in the top left, we have people who are high in internal self-awareness, but low in external self-awareness, and those are called introspectors. Introspectors are clear on who they are, but they don't challenge their own views or search for blind spots by getting feedback for others. This can harm their relationships and limit their success. And then we have the last category, low internal self-awareness and low external self-awareness, and those are seekers. They don't know yet who they are, what they stand for, or how their teams see them. As a result, they might feel stuck or frustrated with their performance and relationships. And we're going to talk later, and in the second webinar, we're going to be wholly devoted to this idea of how to increase your self-awareness by getting feedback from others and soliciting that. But one of the key things I would hope you would leave this webinar today is asking yourself, where do I fall in this quadrant? Where am I high on external self-awareness, high on internal self-awareness? And later, I'm going to show you some tips for how to improve your internal and your external self-awareness. Okay, so moving forward to the really bad news, as if it couldn't get worse, right? The really bad news is that power and experience are negatively correlated with self-awareness. And this is referred to as the CEO disease. So the CEO disease is this idea that the higher, and this is not a speculation, this is from empirical data, the higher you are in the organizational chart, the more success you have, the more experience you have, the less likely you are to be self-aware. And there are several hypothesized reasons for this. So we know that there's a correlation. We don't know necessarily what causes this, but three of the ideas that could potentially cause this is one, you're just blinded by your own success. So you see that you've moved throughout the organizational chart, you've been promoted, and you over-identify and over-associate with your external success that I've got it figured out. I know what I'm doing. I know how to behave. I have these really great leadership behaviors. And the truth is that that may be true. And it may have been true in the past. But what we mentioned earlier is that self-awareness is this ongoing, continual dynamic where it's not just a one-time thing where, boom, I'm highly self-aware, I've arrived, I don't need to try to pay attention anymore. With every change in your team, the team dynamics shift, and external self-awareness, you have to reevaluate that all over again. So this is a continual process. So because you've been successful, yes, that could be an indicator that you were highly self-aware in the past, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're highly self-aware today. Now, the second idea with this is that it's just hard to get feedback. So the higher you are in the organizational chart, the less likely people are to tell you hard things about yourself because they're afraid of you. They're afraid of your power. They're afraid of your position. They don't want to put themselves in a position where they've made an enemy with somebody that holds power in their organization to potentially make or break their career. And so they're going to be more reluctant to give you that feedback. And again, in 2 weeks when Jeremiah comes up, Jeremiah is a phenomenal leader. And so he's going to really be speaking to you from experience of how he's created a culture. With him as my boss, I never feel uncomfortable giving him hard feedback. He's created psychological safety within the relationship that he and I have, so where I can go to him and I can tell him hard things at any time. And I have to be respectful in how I do that, obviously, but he's done an incredible job of trying to eliminate the CEO disease and not be the type of leader that is difficult to give feedback to. And then the third idea, the third reason that this could be true, and we're just speculating, but another possible reason is that as a CEO, as an executive, as a key leader within your organization, you feel pressure to defend this persona. So you don't want to be aware of your own weaknesses anymore because you're afraid if I look too deeply at my weaknesses, then I'm going to realize what I already know to be true, that I'm an imposter, that I don't really belong in the seat, that I'm suffering from imposter syndrome. I'm not really cut out for this. I don't know what I'm doing. And so it becomes not this idea of looking at myself and honestly acknowledging my strengths and my weaknesses so that I can improve my leadership effectiveness, but it becomes this thing where now I'm defending a persona. I'm defending this idea that of course I'm the CEO, of course I'm an executive. I'm incredibly self-aware. I have all these strengths. I don't have very many weaknesses. And it just isn't true. And it doesn't need to be something that you defend. Imposter syndrome is something at Strata Leadership, we're leaders in executive coaching. And we coach a lot of leaders across a lot of successful organizations. And almost to the person, we see that everyone struggles with imposter syndrome. It's not something that you can escape. Of course you're an imposter. Of course you don't have it all figured out. Of course you're playing a role that sometimes may be bigger than your capabilities. And so for us as executive coaches, it's about coming alongside of you and helping encourage you that it's okay. It's okay to feel like an imposter. It's okay to not know what you're doing at all times. It's okay if you're the CEO, if you're the owner of a company, to not have it all figured out. And in fact, the earlier you recognize that you don't have it all figured out, that you have weaknesses that you need to become aware of, the more effective you will be and the more your organization will grow. So that's a little bit about CEO disease. Adam Grant, in an article called People Don't Actually Know Themselves Very Well, this is an Atlantic article if you want to reference it later, he says the more objective people think they are, the more they discriminate because they don't realize how vulnerable they are to bias. And so this is one of the damaging effects of 80% of us, 80% of us thinking that we are more self-aware than we actually are, is the more you believe yourself to be self-aware, the less likely you are to look in the mirror and have honest conversations with yourself about, do I see myself clearly? Do others see myself the way that I see myself? And so the more that you think you have it all figured out, the less likely you are to be self-aware because you're not willing to be honest and to be vulnerable with yourself. The truth of the matter, speaking as an organizational psychologist, the truth of the matter is that we all have bias. I know that we don't want to believe that we have bias, and there are ways that we can eliminate that and ways that we can set up systems and procedures to protect ourselves and protect our teams from our own inherent biases and discriminatory behaviors and activities. But the reality is that we all come from a specific worldview. We all have been raised in a specific setting in a specific time in history. And because of this, all of these things combine together so that what we see and what we hear in the world filter through our worldview, our experiences, and our biases. And then that's how we assign meaning and interpretation to these things. And so the idea is not necessarily to eliminate bias, but to acknowledge that you have bias and then to seek to understand what those biases are, where your areas of weakness are, where your developmental opportunities are, where you're low in self-awareness, and then create systems and procedures and surround yourself with people who can tailor to those things and mitigate the effects of your weaknesses and your biases. So being honest with yourself that you do have these tendencies to lack in self-awareness is truly the first step. Acknowledging that you're not as self-aware as you would like to be is truly the first step in increasing your self-awareness. Okay, even worse news, and we're gonna keep this short and then we're gonna get to the good news. The even worse news is that self-awareness is a critical component to leadership effectiveness. And a lot of you are probably thinking, I already know this. This is why I signed up for this webinar. So we're gonna keep this brief. But Training Development, the TD magazine, they published a study where they examined leaders using Daniel Goleman's Emotional Intelligence Index, correlating that with the self-awareness component, which we'll get to in just a second, but the emotional intelligence with the self-awareness component of emotional intelligence. And they looked at leaders who were able to improve their scores on a self-awareness measure. 100% of those included in the study, it was a sample size of 72, 100% of those saw an improvement in workplace effectiveness. Every single person that improved their self-awareness said they were more effective in the workplace. And this could be intrapersonal, my own productivity, or it could be interpersonal, how I relate to and exist with others. 86% saw an improved ability to identify and manage their emotions. And self-awareness is a critical component of emotional intelligence and the ability to identify and manage your own emotions. 81% saw reduced stress, and 79% experienced more effective relationships at work. So we can just see through these numbers that the self-awareness is obviously critical to leadership effectiveness. One of the ways I've sought to improve my self-awareness throughout the years and create those systems that I was talking about is I am not a morning person. It takes a really long time for me to wake up in the morning and to get to a place where I want to be social, where I want to engage others. I don't know what it is. I wish I could fix it, but I just wake up a lot of mornings on the wrong side of the bed. And so for me, one thing that I've done throughout my career to become, because I'm self-aware of that, to increase my effectiveness at work is I generally don't check email until about 9 or 10 a.m. in the morning. So what am I doing? I'm carving out the space for myself to get into a positive mental space and to decrease my anxiety, decrease my stress. So I'll go around and I'll talk to my coworkers and I'll ask them how they're doing. And I'll begin to form these connections and talk to people and just give myself the space to get up and going before I check email. Because what I've done in the past is check my email first thing in the morning, completely misread the tone of somebody else, and then send a harsh reply in return. And this is just a hypothetical situation, but then maybe I get called down to the CFO's office and I have to have a meeting with this person and that person about this harsh email. Completely hypothetical. It may or may not have happened to me, but it definitely did happen. And for that reason, I no longer check email first thing in the morning because I'm very likely to misread the tone and then also not moderate my own emotional response and not reply in a way that I would like to be perceived as a teammate and an employee. So that's just one way that I've been able to improve my self-awareness. Self-awareness, as I mentioned, is one of the 4 components, one of the 4 quadrants of the emotional intelligence framework made popular by Daniel Goleman back in the 90s. And you're probably familiar with emotional intelligence. And so I don't need to go into all of the data and science of how emotional intelligence is correlated with leadership effectiveness. But I would just point out that emotional or self-awareness is one of the 4 components of emotional intelligence, and it falls into this category of recognition, so being able to see myself clearly and then have personal competence. And I would argue that one of the reasons I'm sharing this framework is I would argue that if you're not self-aware, you're not going to be able to self-manage, you're not going to have social awareness, and you're not going to be able to have relationship management. So self-awareness really, I believe, is a precursor to having high emotional intelligence. And if you don't have high emotional intelligence, the data would bear out that you're just not going to likely be a very effective leader, because emotional intelligence is the ability to recognize, control, and regulate my emotional response. The truth is, as human beings, we are highly emotional. And in any situation, we talked about this a little bit in our critical thinking and decision-making webinar. If you haven't seen that, I would encourage you to go to YouTube and check it out. Well, we talked about how leaders, whenever a decision is needing to be made, typically our first reaction is highly emotional and our logic kind of falls in after. But the first initial response, just from being a human being, and none of us are exempt from this, is to respond emotionally. So when I shot that email off, or may not have shot that email off early in the morning, that was me letting my emotions drive me and not practicing good emotional intelligence because I didn't have good self-awareness to be able to set up systems in place to protect against my own weaknesses. Okay, the good news, and we'll close on this. We've just got a little bit of time and then we're going to get into questions and answers. The good news is that you can improve your self-awareness. So the first thing that I want to talk about is one of the things that researchers have identified in self-awareness research is that people are more effective when they ask what questions and not why questions. So introspection, or looking within ourselves, can be a healthy behavior to an extent, but actually the more that we look at ourselves, the more that we're likely to introspect and ruminate on why am I the way that I am? Why do I do these things? Why do I have these behaviors and these tendencies and these aspirations, these ambitions is a little bit of fool's gold, in the sense that it doesn't really matter why, because your temperament, your personality is pretty fixed, and that's not going to be something that you're going to be able to change throughout life. So instead of asking why questions, why am I the way that I am, which you really don't have a lot of control over, ask what questions. So now that I know my tendencies, now that I know that I'm not a morning person, and that I'm likely in the mornings to shoot off emails that I'll later regret throughout the day, now that I know that, what am I going to do? Well, I'm not going to reply to emails until 9 or 10 a.m. So creating these systems, asking what questions that are positive, they put you in the driver's seat. So now we're taking the focus off of why you are the way that you are, something that you're not likely to change, and focusing on what can I control? What can I do now that I'm self-aware, now that I see my strengths, now that I see my weaknesses? What can I do moving forward to be the most effective leader and to play to my strengths and to mitigate my weaknesses and to look for the development, the opportunities for development that I can. So asking what questions, not why questions, takes the focus off of us and puts it onto the future and gives us a positive outlook to control what we can control. Hickson and Swan say that thinking about why one is the way that one is may be no better than not thinking about oneself at all. And so this goes back to that research of the more you look at yourself, the more you introspect, level of introspection and depression and anxiety are positively correlated. So if you tend to be a highly introspective person, if you're always looking at yourself and asking yourself questions about why I am the way that I am, you're more than likely to experience higher levels of depression and anxiety. So introspection, self-reflection is a good thing if you don't do it too much. Too much of a good thing leads to depression and anxiety on the back end. Okay, so now here's some quick tips to how to increase your internal self-awareness and your external self-awareness. For internal self-awareness, one of the greatest proven practices is just to practice mindfulness. So mindfulness is literally taking a moment and asking yourself, whether it be through meditating, or just reflection, journaling, which I've mentioned below, just taking that moment, even if it's breathing or exercising, and asking myself, how am I feeling? Where are my pain points? Where are my tensions? Where are my frustrations? Where am I feeling good? Where am I feeling bad? Asking yourself these things will give you a higher level of self-awareness without going into that introspection phase to the point that it's damaging, and just taking a second to take self-inventory. So asking yourself, I mean, this sounds super cheesy, but it can be as simple as asking yourself, how are you feeling today? Where are you doing well? Where do you need help? Where can I be more kind to myself and create an environment where I'm increasing my own self-awareness? It also can be this observation of just looking at myself and looking back upon the day and saying, what happened today? And where are the moments that I'm proud of, and where's the moments that I'm not proud of? And maybe through this, you increase your internal self-awareness by saying, I need to go apologize to this person because I had this effect on them. So internal self-awareness leading to improved external self-awareness. And then assessments. And one of the assessments that we offer at Strata Leadership that I would highly encourage you to take to increase your internal self-awareness would be the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. The Myers-Briggs Type Indicator will tell you how you make decisions, where you draw your energy from, and it'll give you an increased sense of yourself so that you can again go back and create those systems to thrive as you were created. So knowing your Myers-Briggs, which does not change throughout time, unless you're on the cusp and you may flip a little bit, but for the most part, your Myers-Briggs is going to stay the same throughout your life. Understanding what makes me tick, where do I get my energy from, what fills my bucket, will help you improve your internal self-awareness. Then external self-awareness, seek others' feedback, which we're going to cover in so much depth in the next webinar, which I hope you join us for. And then assessment, so using a 360-degree feedback assessment where you're evaluating yourself on different competencies or leadership dimensions within your organization, and then those around you, your supervisor, your peers, and your subordinates are also evaluating you on those same things and seeing where's the difference between how I see myself and how others see myself. And what's amazing about the 360 is it's never all or nothing. It's never, I think I'm so bad and my team thinks I'm so good. And it's never, my team thinks I'm so bad and I think I'm so good. More often than not, it's going to be, I think I really stink at this. My team thinks I'm really great. I think I'm really great at this. My team thinks I'm not so good. And being able to increase your external self-awareness by seeing how you rate yourself versus how others rate you. And then the last one would be the California Psychological Inventory, or the CPI 260. The CPI 260, and I can go in some more depth with this later, you have my contact information, but the CPI 260 actually has a built-in 360-degree mechanism. So the way that this assessment was built and validated over time has proved that it shows you how you see yourself on 18 different leadership dimensions in the coaching report for leaders. It shows you how you see yourself versus how others see you on these 18 different dimensions that have been highly correlated with leadership effectiveness. And just really quick, I want to say that with our CPI 260 assessment, we're offering a deal right now, and you will, and I truly mean this, you will never see us price it lower than this. we are practically at $249. I know that may sound like a lot of money, but based on the cost of the assessment and the cost of the time to administer it, we are practically giving this away for free. And I'm not exaggerating. For that reason, we've limited this to only 30 people. So the first 30 people that come and take advantage of this special on the CPI 260, it will be sold out after 30. We have to cut it off at that. So this is a $949 value normally. And for this season, because we want to support our community, because we love you guys and we want to be here for you, and we want to help you improve your self-awareness, we're offering resources for free, completely free, like this webinar. And then we're also offering some of our services like the CPI 260 at about a 75% discount. And so for $249, you can contact Jeremiah, or you can go onto our website. It's under the resources section, and immediately purchase this. And you're going to get the CPI 260 assessment. You're going to get 2 reports with that, which we'll send you sample reports later as a follow-up to this webinar, so you can see exactly what's covered in that. You're going to get the coaching report for leaders, as well as the client feedback report. And then you're going to get 75 minutes with myself or with one of our Strata certified coaches to debrief. So we're going to take that from you. And that's the real value of this assessment, is not just the assessment itself, but it's having somebody interpret those results for you, put it into a format that's easy for you to digest, actionable. And I'm going to, if I debrief with you, or if a coach debriefs with you, they're going to give you actionable steps that you can take to go ahead and improve your self-awareness, enhance your leadership effectiveness, see yourself as others see you across 36 different folk skills and 18 different leadership competencies. And so $249, I mean this, it's a tremendous value, and I hope that you will take advantage of it. So I'm going to pass it over now back to Jeremiah, and I think we've just got a few minutes for Q&A. So we're coming up. We've only got about 3 minutes of time. We said this would be an hour, so I apologize for going a little bit long, but we're more than happy to stick on past 11. So if you have something to go do, feel free to go do that. But if you want to hang out and ask some questions, we'll be here. We'll hang out with you. We've got time. We don't have anywhere to go. So we're just excited to have this time with you. Thank you for all of you who've stuck around to the end. I hope this was a huge value add to you. And we love serving you. We care about you. We want you to be successful. We're here for you. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Jeremiah.
Yeah, Wes, we have some great questions in the Q&A box right now we're going to address. Before we completely dive into that, I know some of you might have to jump off at once, so I want to make sure that you know, if you would like the PowerPoint from today, feel free to email me. My email, I'm going to type it in right now to the chat box, and you can shoot me a personal email, and I'm going to get that to you today or first part of tomorrow. So let me shoot that over to you. So there's my email.
We'll make the recording available to all of you as well to be able to share.
Yeah, I've also, if you look in the chat box, I just made the connected our YouTube channel, so you can follow us. We're going to upload this if you want to share it with your teams. So we'll dive into some questions right now here. The first one was, I don't know if you can see this, from Angela. She asked, what is a great way to determine a candidate's self-awareness when making hiring decisions? That's a great question, and that can definitely be a struggle when you're hiring employees. Wes, what do you think?
That absolutely can be a struggle. So as an industrial and organizational psychologist, I'm hyper sensitive to selection measures and using tools and assessments within a selection setting. So the first thing you have to do is you have to make sure, I would say a CPI 260 absolutely can help you, because you can administer those results, and we can help you with that if your organization is doing the work of doing a formal job analysis and validating the job connectedness, and then also proving that the assessment is not going to have adverse impact against protected classes. But if you've done all of that work and the CPI 260 has been validated in certain job settings, not all, but certain job settings to be a part of the assessment process, you can have somebody take that assessment and then ask them questions. So like, how do you see yourself as a dominant leader? Or how do you see your social conformity or your sociability? And you could compare those results with the assessment versus the person. But I don't know that there's a great answer to that question without using an assessment, because we're very prone, just as I mentioned earlier, we're very prone to bias. And so it can be difficult for us to know somebody's true feelings and intentions, and be able to tell whether they're telling the truth or not. But I would just say, just using an assessment, or possibly just seeing, are there answers? So having multiple interviews with multiple interviewees and seeing, are there answers consistent over time, is going to tell you a lot about whether they have some sort of connection between how they see themselves and how others see them. Jeremiah, do you have anything to add to that?
I do. The first thing is we are leadership development experts, organizational psychologists experts, not HR and law. So there are obviously ramifications for when you utilize an assessment when hiring. So definitely check on that if you ever look into that. For me, I've always enjoyed open-ended questions. And if you have, I always suggest having 2 or 3 interviews, having different people in the room interviewing. And I like asking the same question in a different way every interview. So you can collect that feedback. Open-ended questions, some examples would be, tell me, situational. Tell me a situation that you felt anxiety, frustration, you were flustered, and how did that not impact you? How did it impact those around you? So you're really asking questions on how did they pick up on their surroundings and environment, specifically with their coworkers in the past. So you ask that question 3 or 4 times, and you're going to hear a theme there, and you're going to be able to pick up on some of those senses. So that's what I got there. So another question that came in: how do you create the psychological safety you mentioned? Wes, I know I'm addressing this next week in my presentation, and I can't wait to get that. I'm passionate about that. But Wes, with your background, I'd love to hear your input on that.
Yeah, well, we absolutely are going to tackle that topic in depth. That's the whole focus of our next webinar, which I hope you'll join us for. That's going to be on May 21st, and Jeremiah is going to bring that to you with his real life experience of how he's been able to create that type of environment at Strata and in previous positions as a leader within different organizations. But the very first thing, I'll just answer this really briefly because I do hope you'll tune in 2 weeks, but I don't want to leave you hanging until then. The first thing I would say is when people give feedback, really be careful about your body posture and your responses to that. So invite feedback. You can say openly many, many times, I want your feedback. What do you guys think? And if you're not getting that feedback, there's probably a good chance that somebody did speak up in the past and give you that feedback, and you became immediately defensive and pushed back on that feedback or rationalized it. And so maybe if that's the case with your team and they're reluctant to give you feedback, 2 things: continue to reiterate, I want your feedback. I would love to hear it. I want to improve my self-awareness. And then 2, apologize if there's been times in the past that you've given me feedback and I've rejected that. I apologize for that. And moving forward, you're never going to be penalized for giving me feedback. I want us to have a culture that's safe and warm and welcoming. So just being cautious whenever others do give feedback, that you are open and receptive to it and humble.
That's so good, Wes. Thanks for that insight. That really leads us into the next question. So I won't say the name because we're talking about a leader, executive leader here. So I really feel like our CEO wants honest feedback, but I feel because of past experiences employees have had when they gave honest feedback, and because it wasn't accepted as they thought it would be, they have went back to being afraid to give that feedback. How can I help those employees understand that the CEO now realizes that a lot of feedback was helpful and they are working towards changing? How can I really convince them to give the feedback now? Wes, I'm sure you got some thoughts. I've got one really based off the last question, and then leading into this is leaders, when you're talking about feedback and you're talking about creating that safe environment, specifically looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs and creating that safe space, we're talking about threats here, psychological threats. So as a leader, how do you identify the threat, which is what we're talking about with the CEO? How do they identify the threat? How do they address that threat and communicate that threat? Even though the reality of the threat may not be there, but the perception is, and perception is reality, especially when we're talking about employee relationships. The third thing is, what I would do is, as a CEO, prove that that threat is not real. specifically through vulnerability. Step out and show them that you are willing and you are serious about taking that. And some of the tools you can utilize for that, a lot of organizations offer these tools. We offer these tools at Strata is prove it. Say, we're going to do a cultural analysis, and I want all of you to give your honest feedback without ramifications. In fact, we've hired a third party so that you're protected here. And we want that feedback. So that's a powerful thing to do. The Executive 360, while they won't see those results, your peers and your direct reports and those above you, whether it's a board, can provide feedback for you. And so now those around you know you are seeking that feedback, you are serious about that feedback, and you have that growth mindset. Really, the third thing, and what Wes touched on, is a first great starter and affordable starter is the CPI 260. That is 260 questions. That's going to compare you to leaders across the board. They've done tens of thousands of data collection on this, and that it is shocking. I did it a few weeks ago with Wes. Got to sit down with him. He walked me through it, talking about vulnerability with somebody you work with. That is so valuable. So those are the three things I would address right there in those two questions. Wes, do you have anything to follow up on that?
No, I think that's a perfect answer. I would also just say, be the change that you wish to see. So if you're not giving feedback, then others are probably not likely to give you feedback. So you practicing the transparency of stepping out on a limb and giving somebody else difficult feedback first will open that communication and break down those walls to where they've seen you're willing to go there. So then they may be more willing to reciprocate in the future.
That's good. And very be the change, what a sensei answer was. So very 2020. Good job. Okay, so we've got several more questions. We're going to stick on here and answer all these this week. So thanks for sticking on with us. We've got another one. It says, how do I balance? This is from Matt. How do I balance focusing on my strengths so I optimize performance and acknowledging my weaknesses so I continue improving? Wes, I'm going to let you take that one.
I'm sorry, can you read that question again?
Yeah. So Matt says, how do I balance focusing on my strengths so I optimize performance and acknowledging my weaknesses so I continue improving?
So Matt, I would definitely say give precedence to your strengths. So one of the things that we know from the psychological literature would be that we really as human beings can only focus on 1 to 2 to maybe 3 things to improve at a time. So if you have this whole list of things that you would like to improve about yourself, whittle that down as small as you can. Say, this is the one area of weakness or developmental opportunity that I'm trying to improve and enhance. And then the others, create systems and structures like I was talking about, or surround yourself with people who cover you on those weaknesses. So being aware that, hey, I'm not very good at detail. I miss things sometimes. Surround yourselves with people who are highly detail oriented and can keep you in check and create those systems of checks and balances. But don't overwhelm yourself with trying to improve everything all at once. From habit research, we know that that's completely impossible and completely illogical. Pick the one thing you want to change, the one habit or thing about yourself you would like to improve, and then start with the smallest possible step. So in his book, Atomic Habits, James Clear talks about if you want to run a marathon, what's the smallest possible goal you can set for yourself? And one of the things that he recommends is that you put your running shoes on, and that's considered a win. So that's the first step in you running a marathon, is make it as easy as possible to start changing your behavior, start improving yourself with the smallest possible first step. Consider that a win, and then build on that. But really, I would say, Matt, the beauty of being on a team, if you have the privilege of being on a team, is that more often than not, you don't have to expose your weaknesses. You get to play to your strengths. So really focus on maximizing your strengths, because that's where you're going to add the most value ever. I would much rather see a team where everyone's playing to their strengths rather than where everyone's trying to raise their weaknesses up to a minimally competent level. So maximize your strengths to be the linchpin on your team. Don't try to play to your weaknesses too much or raise those.
That's good, Wes. All right, so we've got a few more here. Yeah, here, is there a free online Myers-Briggs type assessment? And then how can one access it? Like if you're here in the Philippines. So obviously international. Strata actually is moved to 100% virtual right now during the season. So we're doing all of our coaching, all of our training, all of our assessments, debriefs virtually. So what you could do, while it is not a free option, it would be an affordable option through Strata. We'd be happy to administer that. And then the important thing with assessments is we highly encourage people not to walk through those themselves. The results can be skewed. You can read into those too much. It can really mess with your brain. And as a leader, you've got to protect your mind, especially through a season like this when we're already up against hurdles and threats. And so I would say hire somebody, whether it's us or somebody locally, that you can meet with either in person or virtually, that can walk you through that and really explain and break that down and help you set up those goals to achieve the opportunities within that, but also learn how to live within those strengths. So that would be my input on that.
Yeah, I would say I absolutely agree with everything that Jeremiah is saying. The Myers-Briggs is much more powerful when you have a certified practitioner to interpret and share those results with you. If that answer is if you don't have the resources at all to be able to access that, if you do, it is far and away the best option and well worth the time to get a valid test, a test that has been validated by the Myers-Briggs company. They only offer a paid version, but if you want a knockoff free version that may or may not be entirely accurate, 16personalities.com has a free test. They also have the listing of the 16 different types, and so you can go access those there. So I don't want to hold back because there is a free resource out there. It hasn't been validated. It's not approved by the researcher, so it may or may not be that accurate. And I would say it's definitely not as accurate as the real thing that's been validated. Only the Myers-Briggs company owns those questions. Nobody else can use those. That's proprietary information. And then you also really need the certified practitioner. But if you just you have no other resources and you just want a free knockoff version that may not be that accurate, 16personalities.com does a pretty good job.
Perfect. Thank you, Wes. I mean, those are free resources are always available. Thanks for having that on the top of mind and knowing about that one. So that's beneficial. Some people are asking about the CPI 260. Again, while the assessment's important, what is really key and really where the price point set as low as we can for our coaches' time. I'm going to send a link in the chat box and people have asked for it. That's really up to 75 minutes with Wes or one of our other coaches. They're going to debrief and walk you through that assessment. Pretty powerful. So Wes, we've got a couple more questions here. It says, how can you help, this is anonymous, how can you help someone you work with who is excellent at what she does and would be a great mentor to many others, but finds it difficult to speak in a manner that builds up, encourages, speaks the truth in love? That's good. Self-awareness is a struggle to her, but when you give her feedback and she realizes what she did later on, but people under her often end up hurt and wanting to quit. And again, that question is in the Q&A. I think everybody can see that. So Wes, do you have immediate thoughts on that?
That's really, really tough. And we've all been there and had that coworker for sure. It's funny, no matter where you work, you always seem to be working with the same people. They just look different and have different names, but no matter where you're kind of amongst the same types. You can't help somebody raise their self-awareness if they're not willing to. We do get hired frequently, and Jeremiah can attest to this, of organizations saying, I have this leader who is an incredible leader, but they're a transactional leader. So they're driving results, they're holding people accountable, they're producing, they're making my company money on the productivity side, but on the people side, they're burning through resources. I'm losing key employees because of them, and I don't know what to do. They're so good at their job, but they're so bad with people. How do I do this? And we get hired to coach those individuals really on a consistent basis. It's something that we see incredibly frequently. So if there's an option, if there's an opportunity for your organization to hire a coach, if you work with that type of person, but if there's not, then really the only thing that you can do is to continue to build a relationship with that person and try to earn their trust. So trust is the product of credibility, reliability, intimacy divided by self-orientation. So if you convince that person, I'm for you, I want you to succeed, I see all of these things that you're incredible at, and just building that relationship and helping build the trust with them through credibility, reliability, intimacy divided by self-orientation, you can really help foster that relationship where you can speak honestly and openly with that person if they're receptive, and some people just aren't. So
yeah,
a little bit of
that's
a little
great.
bit of a bad news answer.
Well, and I could follow up with resources. You know, there are a lot of great trainings out there. We do one called Giving and Receiving Feedback. And then we also, you know, that might be a sense. I don't know what level this person is at, but you might want to hire a coach. Coaches can identify some of this and work with her on that. Something else to consider is we do a coaching clinic here, and you're talking about how she might be a great mentor someday, but how do you invest in that right now so that you can get her there? Well, while coaching is not mentoring, we do a coaching clinic that helps people identify ways to coach their employees and the people they work with. And so that might be a resource to send her through if you want to invest in her, and the financial resources are there. If you email me, I'm happy to give that information to you. Moving on to our next question. We've got a few more questions, and then we're going to let everybody go. It looks like people are still hanging around here for this. So I guess we are providing some beneficial feedback here. So, okay. So Anonymous says, how do you handle peers that give unsolicited feedback for your improvement? When they give positive affirmation, it feels like they're practicing their leadership muscles and doesn't seem genuine. That's a tough one. I've got an idea, Wes. I'll go ahead and provide mine, and then I'm sure you've got thoughts too. So here at Strata Leadership, what we practice, and I love this. I learned this actually when I joined the team several years ago here, is the 10% rule. And so Wes, when we get off of here, I am not going to provide my feedback to Wes until we have a one-on-one. I'm his supervisor, so I'm going to do that. If I was his peer, I would not provide that feedback unless he comes to me and says, Jeremiah, I need you to 10% me. And so what that's saying is that out of everybody in our life, it's really easy to give everybody the 90%, saying, yeah, that was great. That was awesome. You know, you might have done this a little bit better, but you're holding back that 10%. And the power of leaders and the power of coaching is saying what they need to hear, because that's how you really love people. And if they know you love them, if you build that relational collateral up ahead of time, now when Wes comes to me after this webinar, and I guarantee you he's going to come to me and call me 10 minutes after this and say, what could I have done better? Because Wes has a growth mindset. And that's the importance of honing that growth mindset within your culture and creating that environment of safety. But Wes is going to call me, and I'm going to say, great job, Wes. That was awesome. You know, you did a great job doing the research, putting together the PowerPoint, communicated clearly. And then he's going to say, yeah, but what's the 10%? And I've been taking notes, because there's always room for growth no matter who you are. And so that's our culture at Strata. And I would say start that culture at your organization. And then talk about, maybe bring someone in to do a training, whether it's a third party, find a good TED Talk on it and talk about it as a team and say, hey, this is the culture we want to create. This is how we give feedback. And there's negative ways to give feedback and positive ways. So that can be addressed. It all starts with culture. Wes, do you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, that's good. I would say unsolicited feedback can definitely be harmful. And there's several components to this. So I think the first thing, in the non-silver bullet that is hard and difficult and messy, and relationships are hard and difficult and messy, would just be to go to that person or persons and say, hey, you give me this feedback often. I appreciate it. I love that you're pouring into me and wanting to develop me. At the same time, I can only focus on one or maybe two things at a time to improve on. So could we set aside some time, maybe a one-on-one, where we have that conversation and you just give me the one or two things you think I could improve upon? Then also the second thing I would look at is what's the medium? So is this person texting you feedback? Are they emailing you feedback? Are they leaving a Post-it note on your desk with feedback? Or are they having the conversation face-to-face? And if it's not happening face-to-face, it absolutely has to happen face-to-face. Feedback is never a good thing to give. If you can do it over video, if you can do it, so face-to-face would be first, video would be second, phone would be third, and then all other options should just be off the table. You shouldn't give feedback through text or email because we can't read tone, we can't read body language, and communication is the sum of all of those things. So I would just have the conversation if you can to say, I appreciate the feedback. I can only take so much at a time. And then on the other side of it feels like they're just giving positive feedback because they have to. I don't know that there's a whole lot that you can do about that other than try to be grateful that they're at least aware enough that they know that they need to give positive feedback from time to time. But that may just be a relational thing where over time you build that collateral and form the relationship outside of the workplace on a human level where it comes more naturally.
That's good. Thanks, Wes. Somebody mentioned just in the chat box here, Wes, could you share the equation for trust? Would you mind typing that in there for everybody to see? That would be really helpful. That is a powerful resource. Somebody else said, it takes a lot of humility to allow yourself to be vulnerable and take on that growth mindset and receive negative feedback. That is so true. It all starts with character. And that's what we're talking about here, right? We're talking about self-development, self-leadership. How am I leading myself so that I can engage my team in relationship and provide a safe environment so we can have feedback both ways in a healthy manner. So that's great. Thanks, Wes, for sharing that. We've got one more question, and it looks like we're going to get out of here and let everybody get back to their day. And I hope this bit has brought a lot of peace and hope to you. So, all right. So how do you coach someone on understanding their lack of self-awareness and lack of emotional intelligence? Wes, I'm going to let you take that one.
So I keep going back to the 360-degree assessment, and you may just think, man, this guy does not have new material. He doesn't have new content. But the 360 is so powerful, I can't get away from it. So administering a 360-degree assessment, and we provide that here at Strata. If you want a third party to do that, that may be something, there's resources online. It may be something that your HR team builds out and implements organization-wide. I would say if you do a 360-degree assessment, you're going to want the person to rate themselves on several categories. Then you want their supervisor, their peers, and their subordinates to rate them on those same categories. And then you want to present that data in a visual way to where they can see these are the areas where I see myself different than others. So there's a resource called the Johari window. You may be familiar with that, but it just indicates this is something I'm aware of that others are unaware of, something I'm aware of that others are aware of, and it's just this quadrant, the Johari window, Johari. And so then you can take those results and place it on that window and show people these are some of their blind spots. But administering that assessment, and I wouldn't recommend doing it for just one person because that can immediately put them into defensive mode of why am I getting this assessment and no one else is. So I would at least do this amongst your team. If not, you can roll it out to your whole organization. That would be preferred. But that will show the person, this is how I see myself. This is how my supervisors see me. This is how my peers see me. This is how my subordinates see me. And you can break it down into those categories. And then you also can just give an overall category. This is how self sees me. And then combine the others of this is how others see me. And having that data to see where's the discrepancies between where I think that I'm really good, or like I said, it can be a positive sometimes too, of I think I'm really not good at this and others think I am good at this. So the 360 doesn't have to be all negative. It can sometimes be really positive as well. But I just think that tool is so powerful and so important. And like I said, we offer that at Strata. We'll come in as a third party, keep all that information confidential. So only the person who is on the receiving end of the 360 sees their results. So those aren't made public to other people. The confidentiality of that is really important to protecting that person and not having them feel like they're not in a safe environment. And so we're happy to come in and do that for your organization. Or organizations create those in their own HR departments and administer those themselves all the time as well. So whatever option makes the most sense for you and your organization.
That's great. Thank you, Wes, for taking that. Great feedback there. All right, we've got one more question, and unless anything else comes in here, and then we'll get off here. So what if the person giving feedback is offensive and hurtful to the person receiving feedback? Wes, we live in a world and a culture of people getting offended, right? And so this is going to be a very, very common theme in a lot of organizations. And how do you engage people that can either deliver feedback in a negative way? Maybe they haven't honed that skill, because this is a skill that you can build and you can learn. And then how do you, as an individual, take that and receive that, even if it's hurtful? Because just like a runner, you've got to push yourself, and you don't get better without pain. And so as nice as some feedback is, it's going to hurt on some level. And so Wes, what do you think?
So I hesitate to say this because I don't want you to create an out for yourself, but there are certain people that you should not receive feedback from in your life. Whether it's you don't think they have your best interests in mind, or they may not be self-aware themselves. Actually taking that feedback can be more damaging and hurtful to yourselves. So there's certain people in my life that they give me feedback and I'm not receptive to that because it's not coming from a trusted, safe source. I don't think that they have my best interest in mind, or maybe they don't have the maturity to be able to see it so clearly. That's the first step, is asking yourself, is this a trusted source whose feedback I want to receive? And there's absolutely situations where it's appropriate to say that's not good feedback for me in this moment. In other cases, when you have somebody, so for me, like Jeremiah as my boss and my friend, who I know he has my best interests in heart, I may just have that conversation with him and say, hey, the way that you delivered that feedback is not super helpful. One of the things, talking about self-awareness, I hate Post-it notes on my desk. Like if I come back to my desk and I've been away for a while and somebody's written me a Post-it note, it just gets under my skin. And so I've communicated that to Jeremiah of, hey, and he never did it, so I'm not ragging on him, but please don't leave a Post-it note on my desk. If you have something important, call me, even text me, just don't do the Post-it note. So asking for the feedback in certain ways can be helpful as well. And then as Jeremiah mentioned, we have a training called Giving and Receiving Feedback that may be really, really helpful to your organization. And in that training, we present a framework for giving feedback that takes the focus off of the person and onto the behavior. So shifting the blame from, I'm not attacking you as a person, and doing that in a way that's respectful and considerate of, this is what I'm seeing. And in that framework, we talk about identify the behavior and then identify the perceived consequences of that behavior. So Jeremiah, when you leave Post-it notes on my desk, that makes me really frustrated. And so I'm not saying, Jeremiah, you're a super frustrating person. Why are you not considerate? Why do you just leave Post-it notes on my desk? You're so lazy and inconsiderate. I'm not saying that. I'm saying, when you do this, the behavior, this is how I feel in return. So shifting it from the person onto the behavior is a really powerful way of giving feedback in a way that's not as painful, or maybe not as direct and offensive to that person.
That's great. Wes, thank you so much for the content today. Thank you for just your preparation on this. You did a phenomenal job. That was beneficial for myself, and I know it's going to be beneficial for some of those out there. Here's my information, contact information. Here's Wes's. We are here for you through this time. If you just want to call us, pick our email, that's what we're here for, at no charge to pick through those first ideas and then help you create a plan for development, specifically, whether it's for an individual, for your executive, or for your organization as a whole. So we're here for you. Again, the CPI 260 is a powerful tool. We hope you get a chance to take advantage of that. We will be sending out a follow-up email with a link to register for our next webinar on May 21st. We also will include a link for our YouTube page so that you can have access to our past webinars. We're also going to include the SHRM CE Continue Education code for you, for those of you that would like that. And then as a reminder, we are going to, for those that attend all 3 sessions, we will provide you with a digital certificate of completion for the self-awareness series. So thank you all so much for joining us today. If you like the PowerPoint, shoot me an email. Again, thank you, Wes, and thank you to our community out there for joining us. We had a great crowd today and just had so much fun. Thank you and have a great day. Bye.
Thanks, guys.